Anyway, Bob, thank you. Welcome, and please tell us a little bit about your group and how you got into it and what called you to do it and how it's changed your life and the people it's touched, or anything that comes to mind personally that you'd like to share.
And you give me only 30 minutes?
The nutshell version. The nutshell version.
Well, I do hear Spirit, and Spirit did put me on this track of understanding and learning about what this near-death experience is all about that people were having. I had no idea how prevalent it was. I had no idea of the impact this was going to have, I believe, on the world eventually, because I do believe that science and religion and spirit will all come to unity in truth, and that this may be the vehicle that helps bridge that gap. And some of the things you spoke about, I'm sure you're not surprised, the Spirit put on my heart too. So to begin with, I'm going to read a few of the things that comes from the mouth of an experiencer that had very deep NDE, because near-death experiences come at different levels. They could be minor and very deep. And the very deep ones will take them into the very creation of the universe. And I know people that have had this experience. And once they have this experience, to come back to this plane is very difficult.
I heard that.
And it requires a lot of transition. And on the average, takes about 7 years for someone to have had a deep NDE, near-death experience. And I'll have to include in that an STE, which probably few of you have heard about. And that is a spiritual transformative experience. And they have these, most NDEs will happen with physical trauma, but a spiritual one does not need to have spiritual trauma. The path of the shaman is one in which people can have these experiences that are controlled and intentional. So this is not anything new to mankind. It has always been here, and we can find evidence of these in history. But from one experiencer, and I'm sure you'll be able to hear what I heard when you spoke. And his lessons that he learned is that there is nothing whatever to fear from death. Since we don't die, there's nothing to fear. The only thing we fear is what that great theologian said, I'm not afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens. Dying is peaceful and it is beautiful. Life does not begin with birth nor end with death. Now, this comes from a man that had experienced death. And I have to interject at this point. They call it a near-death experience. And that came out of Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, that he released in 1975. And there was no term for this. But in the dictionary, it says that death is that point of no return. And since these people returned, he couldn't call it death. But when you listen to an experiencer that experienced that, they don't refer to it as near-death experience. They refer to it as their death experience. They know that they were dead. They were no longer in the body. They were no longer on this plane. So they refer to it as a death experience.
So it's death of the physical body. Death Correct. Of the physical body.
The matter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Organic matter.
The other thing that he come out with is life is precious. Live it to the fullest. I used to tell people that my interest was in death. And I said, no, it turned out not to be that. It turned out to be understanding that. It put preciousness of life above everything else. Because that is the one thing that is prevalent all around us. Not death, but life. And since there is no death, we go on and live eternally. We existed before we came here. We'll exist afterwards. But we are here intentionally, and we are here to experience things. You're all here intentionally. And if you listen to Peter Sterling, he will have told you that we have made plans for these lives that we're now in. there is purpose for us to be here, and we individually have purposed that to be and made a choice to be here. The body and its senses are tremendous gifts because that's how we are experiencing this life. So we are to appreciate them. What matters most in life is, anybody? Love. Love is what matters ultimately and completely. I like what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said after her lifetime of working with dying people in hospice, and she said the only questions that she has come to when you leave this world into the next is how much have you loved others and how much have loved you? And the other was, how much have you helped others? Those are the questions she boiled her entire lifetime of experience down to. What matters most in life is love. Living a life oriented toward materialistic acquisitions is missing the point. I think you were referring to that. Cooperation rather than competition makes for a better world. Being a big success in life is not all it cracked up to be. Seeking knowledge is important. You take it with you. That is the one thing that I learned from an experiencer, Beverly Brodsky in San Diego, and she got to see the creation of the universe. And I asked her one time, I said, in that experience, I said, you keep referring to yourself as Bev. I said, how was your identity? What was your identity when you were merged completely with God? I said, did you recognize that identity? Was it still you? And she said, yes. The point is, you will always remain an identity. And you will always be loved. That is the key thing. So, what I was led to talk about is one of the areas that affected my life greatly. And that is one of the experiences that are very common among STEers and NDEers. And now it's happening in the hospital environment with some of the people that are mentoring those dying. And that they are having a life review. Has anyone here heard of or understood what a life review is? Has anyone ever had one? Has anyone here had an NDE? Very good. Okay. I'm not surprised. The near-death experience, in many cases, people have this life review. The life review is something that is totally unique and something I've never heard of before. And in this review, they experience everything in their life in 3D, 360 degrees surround sound, I guess they would call that. It goes beyond that.
Like a This Is Your Life show.
Exactly. Now the interesting thing, and I don't know how that happens, and no one else does either, because most of the experiences of these people that come back from a NDE are, I coined as one of my most favorite words. It's ineffable.
It's what?
Ineffable. The word ineffable means that you cannot explain it. There is no earthly language to communicate what they experience. But they all make attempts to do that. But you listen to them and they'll tell you this is only a meager attempt to try to explain what I experienced. Because they can't. We're unprepared for it. But yet we can be. In a life review, you experience, I can give an example where one man had, when he was a child, was in a he was Jewish and in the synagogue, and he got bored with it, so he took his younger brother outside and put him in a cart and started pushing him around. Well, he decided to push this cart down the little hill. Well, it got out of control, and the cart hit a wall, and he hit his head, and it started bleeding, and he was hurt. So he picked up his brother, and he was now scared, and he took his brother into the temple and asked a very interesting question. He said, "Is there a doctor here? I need a doctor." And of course, half the people in the Jewish temple raised their hand. So they came to his aid, and he was scared. His mother was scared. But years later, 35 years later, when he had his experience, in his review of that, he was aware of everything. And the interesting thing is that he was aware of mosquitoes flying around the area when that happened. He remembered things that our senses do not have the ability to receive right now. But he knew, he said, I could have counted each individual mosquito that was in the area. He experienced every feeling that he had, every smell. He saw everything there. He was connected to everything around him, to the grass, to the air. He could feel the air. He relived the air breathing in through his nostrils to his chest. And it went beyond that. He also experienced his brother's pain. He experienced the exhilaration he was having when he was in that cart going down the hill. And then he experienced the fear he had when he realized he was going to hit a wall. And then he experienced the pain once he hit that wall. And he was bleeding, and he was scared. And then when he carried his brother into the synagogue, he experienced the anger of his mother that he had done this. And at the same time, the fear that she had for her other son that was hurt. And all of these emotions, all of these things were happening to him at once. 360 degrees, instantaneously. We spend all of our lives acquiring all of this stuff, all of our experiences, and yet, in a review, it happens instantaneously. Everything, every detail. Not only from his words, I guess best describes it as, I was seeing it through my mother's eyes. I was experiencing her emotions. He says, essentially, I was her at that point. So one of the universal traits that comes out of an understanding of the near-death experience is that we are all connected. There is no difference. We live this life, as some say, as an illusion that we're separate. And I do believe that that is partially true. But I also believe that it's intentional. That we are been separated, and we are separated to experience this life as an individual. Every person here affects the other person, but just being in their presence. And I say that your sphere of influence is not just your physical body. It is the energy that expands out from you. And some say that's about 6 feet. I've had people feel mine at 30 feet. I think it varies, but I know that it exists.
With purposeful intent, as in our meditation, you can send it all the way around the earth with that purposeful intent.
And that's simply because we're all connected to all of that. It is the God that has created us that has never separated from us. In the masculine and the feminine,
Absolutely.
and in everything that we are.
I was going to comment the experience that your colleague shared. That's what I would call, sometimes we get to experience that here on Earth in a crisis when the brain goes into what's called a gamma wave. That our brain cycle is in a beta brainwave most of the time at about 28 cycles per second. When it's in a gamma wave, it's in thousands and thousands of cycles per second. And the gamma wave, that's when we are able to experience everything in this almost incredible slow motion where you can feel the breeze on every hair and count the mosquitoes and get that connection to somebody else. Some of you may have experienced a gamma wave here on Earth if you were ever in a crisis, and you hear about women that get out of a car and raise the car off of a child in an accident, where you get these superhuman kind of experiences. This is when your brain goes into a gamma wave. This is a natural state of being when you're not constricted to the regular body and the brain. that's what we get to experience when we separate our energy from the matter.
And it is purely energy, because during these experiences, there is no brainwave activity. There is, and they've correlated that and looked at it, and although it's very difficult to determine when that happens, it could be at an instant before or after, but most of these experiences are happening when there is no heartbeat and there is no brainwave activity. And some people, I've been asked, well, how long do people stay in these states before they have an experience? And I know a good friend of mine that had her experience lasted about 1.5 seconds. She was driving a car at the time, and she remembers where she went into it, where she came out. And yet, Mr. Rodinile was actually in the morgue, and he was there for over 4 days, where he was no heartbeat, no brain activity. So these experiences on the other side have no relativity to time, as we understand it. And they can be over there for what appears to be 1 second here. Over there, it would be days.
So I was curious, you mentioned different levels of it, where there are some that are, you said deep, so there are some that are not so deep then, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe to us the difference between the depths and what might cause it, and just kind of give us an educational background on the difference between the two?
Well, there's more than two.
Oh, okay.
There is, some people, I myself, for instance, believe I have an NDE, and that I've been told that by spirit, but I have no memory of it. But I can look at my life, look at the experience of NDEers, and realize that I have been through some of the very same things that they call after effects. If you're looking at an experiencer, you're really looking at their after effects. What have happened to them since that experience? And that can be very minor to, I was shown during a picture when I prayed Mass. I said, I don't want to be an NDE or wannabe. I wanted to understand what this is all about and why it was guided here. And I was shown a picture immediately of laying on the operating table as a 12-year-old having a tonsillectomy. And I remember seeing this picture of, they put this cone site, it's a flour sifter that they used to use in old times that was cone shaped, and they would pour ether on it. That was what they used to put you under back then. So I've dated myself a little bit. And I have met other experiencers that do remember their experience because of that same thing. I had to go back and look at the history and see if that was indeed true. And during the time I had that surgery, that tonsillectomy, and it was. And then I had a good friend of mine that was an experiencer. Actually, when I would introduce myself, I for years said, no, I'm not an experiencer. And he turned to me one time and said, yes, you are. And I didn't address the issue then, but next month when I saw him, I asked him why he said that, and he denied ever saying it. He said, I never said that, and he was going to argue with me, and I said, okay, leave that one alone. So within a couple of weeks, we were sitting at a table at dinner with several other people, and exactly the same thing happened. One person at the table was not acquainted with me, and he asked if I was an experiencer, and I says no, and that's about all I got out. And he turned to me and said, yes, you are. And just about that tone. And somebody across the table said, why did you say that, Steve? And Steve said, I didn't say that. And all of a sudden, 4 other people were pointing their fingers at him saying...
You'd been leading the group by this time.
Oh, yeah.
So it didn't occur to you that the reason you led the group was there was some kind of connection between...
That's exactly right. So, everybody turned to him and said, yes, he did. And he finally admitted that. He said, okay, I guess I said that. And I talked to him later. He has no memory of it. So that came through. So that gave me the confidence to say that I probably have had an NDE. I just don't recall the details of it. And many have had that. They just have to look at their lives, look at the lives of the after effects of an NDE-er. They will be more spiritual. They will not be real religious. They will be loving. They will understand people. They will have intuition. They will have ability to heal. There's just all kinds of things that they can have.
So you talked about this spiritual one, so you may not have actually died, but you had some kind of, maybe a dark night of the soul or some kind of epiphany, something that brought you to a similar level of knowledge without actually having the body stop. Is that what you're referring to as a
Well, in
spiritual?
my case, it would have been my body stopped, because when I researched that, giving too much ether will stop your heart.
Okay.
And then, but back then they had the ability to bring you back.
So is an experience, when I raised my hand, I didn't actually die, but I thought I was going to. And I remembered surrendering and this feeling of euphoria. I was 13 and I was caught in a riptide out in Corona del Mar. And my mother always sat in front of the lifeguard station because she knew she wasn't a strong swimmer. And I was out there caught in a riptide. I was getting pulled under. And I was waving for help. She thought I was waving. She just... she had to, and I was gulping, and I gave up. And I remembered thinking, this is it. I'm going to die. And this incredible feeling of peace came over me. It was not scary. And they talk about dopamine getting released and serotonin getting released at that moment. That was getting really, I was really, really peaceful about it. And I kind of slipped out of consciousness, and then the lifeguard came and pulled me in. So I don't think I don't believe my body actually physically died, but I faced death, and I was really peaceful about it. And that did change my life. And at 13, I was never really afraid of anything. And I've always just approached everything with just it's going to happen or it's not. And, the worst thing it is you're going to die, and I've already decided that that's not a bad thing. And it did change my life as far as my perspective. It took me out of fear in anything that I approached. So would you call that an STE?
Well,
Or maybe I did
it definitely
actually.
was an STE.
Okay.
Because it was a spiritually transforming experience. You may have died, your heart may have stopped, but it's not necessary.
I remember going a little unconscious.
Okay. Well, you probably did lose consciousness at that point, but the key word is to surrender.
Yes.
Once you surrender, and that seems to be one of the catalysts that is very common, is that once you surrender and give up whatever you want to call it, your ego, your life, your presence, whenever you give that up, and it's giving up in totality, then that actually puts you in conscious awareness of who you really are. And that's not your body. It's not your physical existence. It is your soul or your spirit or your consciousness or whatever. They have terms for all these without clear understanding the differences between them or if there's any difference. But that which you are, the presence that emanates from you, that light being that you are, is what gets released and gets aware. And hopefully, for those that remember, that information that you experienced at that point, which the experiencers have, gets downloaded back into the brain, because you remember with the brain. And so that will happen. For me, the information didn't download. It may have, but it may be blocked for whatever reason. It's probably best for me not to remember that, because it's put me on this path that I'm intended to be on. One lady, a good friend of mine, actually was a nurse in the hospital. And this is called the red tennis shoe story. Has anybody ever heard this? Liz has. And Kimberly Clark Sharp was a nurse in a hospital where a Mexican lady came in, didn't speak English, was unconscious when they brought her in, and when she awoke, she told Kimberly about watching people from the other end of the room operate on her, and also told Kimberly, or Kim, about a red tennis shoe that was sitting on the ledge of a window. This is where science comes in, and trying to understand these experiences. And so Kim, for some reason, she said, I didn't understand why, started walking to the hospital looking for this tennis shoe. And this lady explained the tennis shoe. It was red, it had a shoestring that came out, and it was underneath, and explained the exact location of what it looked like and what position it was in. So she then walked from window to window, and one window she looked out, she didn't see anything, and she came back, and then she decided to check again, and she looked really down at the side, and there was the tennis shoe. At that moment, her NDE as a child came back to her. The memory opened up. She said, I fell forward, my head hit the window because I was just getting ready to go unconscious because the information had just flooded in. Now she went back, remembered her NDE, had to deal with that, had to cope with that. It wasn't something that she can deal with immediately. But she did investigate the tennis shoe, and they said the woman came in unconscious. She couldn't have seen it. Kim went outside and looked for the tennis shoe from outside. It could not be seen from the grounds. The only place it could be seen from was that window. So, to her, that was the evidence she needed to say that we are a consciousness that can travel outside of the body. And in states of real trauma, it happens quite frequently. I can't remember the number of, they did some poll, Rasmussen poll or something that said there's, in the United States, there's like 100 million people that have had these experiences. And until just the recent past, nobody would admit them. Because if they did, I see Liz, she's shaking her head, yes, that's absolutely true. They, prior to Raymond Moody, 1975, if you told anybody about these experiences, you were shut down. Ray Kidman was one of those that I had mentioned earlier, and he had this experience, and he was in a very religious family, a very devout Catholic family, and when he went to the priest and told him about it, the priest said, well, since Jesus wasn't in it, it was probably from the devil.
Oh dear.
And shut him down for 35 years.
But it sounds like your group is not just about a forum for people to come and share the experiences and to get support, but it sounds like you take it to a much higher level of deriving the meaning from it and going forward into a different level of thinking as a result of it, and the new paradigm shifts that you get as a result of remembering those and reconciling.
Like I said, saying every experience is different. Some of them have good experiences, and some of them have very bad experiences. Suicide seems to be one where people are, they will have and can have a very bad experience. We have a group called Assist at assist.com, and what she does is she's had a negative near-death experience, and actually the president of IANS has had a negative near-death experience, but they all learn from it. But let me say that those that get involved in what they used to call a hellish experience, and now they call it distressing, I laugh because it would be like telling a woman that was getting ready to deliver a child that you're going to experience some discomfort. And that's, the hellish experience is a better description of it, but they now call it little d NDE, which is a distressing near-death experience. They are learning experiences also. Those that remain in the experience long enough generally become good. So they can be in a very bad experience, and the numbers of those are out there of people that do experience that. But they, for the most part, will move into the light and become a very good experience for them.
Thanks.
I have a question. So those who have NDEs, when they make it to the Bardo, by definition, how do they describe it? The first level of basically seeing it's going, seeing their surroundings, but not really realizing that they're out of the body at that point.
Okay, I am familiar with the bardos and the different levels
It's
of
just
how they.
To the first level, once they die, they don't realize they're dead, they're like, oh, wow. Because I'm a nurse and I've seen people that have just had heart attacks and they're right there, and I go, yeah, you're not here, you're there.
And that's what you're referring to is
Well,
the
yeah,
first
I mean,
bardo. Okay, yeah, it would be the
And
earthly
then
realm.
they're there, these, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead tradition and others, that they stay there, and that's when people who, do ceremony, who, chant or do sound healing, do other things, then can actually help them, adapt to the fact it's no longer, they don't come back, they're there. And so, but to recognize and, there's things that we on this planet, which there's another whole body of thought that suggests that that's our job, that's why we're here, is to help those who do make it over, and it's a huge responsibility that, at least in America, we're not really into taking care of, those who do die, and helping them reach the other side comfortably and with grace and, with support, to boost them up.
American culture does not teach much.
Right, we don't
It is-
accept death at all.
No,
But other
they
cultures,
want to avoid that at all
But you can
costs.
look at other cultures and see these elaborate ceremonies surrounding death, preparating to death, the whole thing, that actually support death and dying, which,
I would say to support the beauty of dying.
yeah, right, okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Do they
there are
talk
the
about
different-
what they experienced
There
on
there
that
are
first
different.
level?
Okay, to answer your question, there are, if you want to call that different levels, then that's what we have to work with. And yeah, there is the earthly level. There is different levels that move beyond into, and I see a tunnel experience, which is not a universal one that we hear about in the news and the literature. People will travel, to a much different realm. To actually get to the place where they've experienced the creation of the universe. What realm do you call that? What bardo do you call that? And I understand that for the Buddhists, that they want to chant and they want to help that person move through the bardos. So they pray for, 5 days or something after. And they help them move through that. And that can be very, very useful, because if their consciousness is still there at this level. I've come to understand that people that die and are staying here, I refer to them as ghosts. Okay, but there are other spirits, other entities that are in that realm. Okay, now understand that when I'm saying these things, this is not a universal thing. This is just something that I have come to an understanding of, and I could be wrong. But there are the different levels, and people that do die and do not know it. And one of the best examples I can give you is the 9/11 planes.